It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Winter Show's Design Lunch. I would like to thank our devoted sponsor of 3 years, Cara, for their dedication and loyalty to the show and to Eastside House. I'd also like to thank Aperture Wines and Faire Lafette for providing us with the delicious wine and bubbles. What is unique about this design fair is that 100% of the proceeds we earn from ticket sales go directly to support Eastside House Settlement in the South Bronx. I am honored to introduce Dan Diaz, who will now share more with us.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the work that we do. It is such an honor to be a part of such a great organization. Our programs are really changing lives. At last year's Design Luncheon, I was able to announce that we were about to start our first charter high school. And I'm happy to say and report to you all that on August 25th of 2025, we invited 75 first 9th grade students to our charter high school focusing on the healthcare field. In 4 years, there will be a group of young people crossing the stage and holding a diploma in one hand and a job offer in another from New York Presbyterian Hospital. And our newest venture, because why not? It's what we do. Our newest venture is something near and dear to, I guess, all of our hearts. We are having an early intervention program that we're about to start for ages 3 to 5 for kids who are struggling with autism. So whether you're wealthy or not wealthy, there are over 2,000 kids here in New York City that do not have access to those services. And we are gonna just maybe touch a little bit of that. When you're buying your tickets for and you're inviting your friends, just know that what you're doing is innovative enough to change people's lives. So thank you.
Without further ado, I would love to welcome our design co-chairs to the stage. I want to introduce Wendy Goodman, who has been our honorary co-chair for 13 years. We just are so grateful to you always for all of your support and enthusiasm, so thank you, Wendy. To our Design Council co-chairs this year, we have Giancarlo Valle, Ben Pentreath, and Noz Nozawa.
So let's start with the show. First of all, and this is a really informal, open conversation, so everybody chime in. What surprised you? What did you find in this show that you thought, I didn't think we'd see it here? Ben?
That's really a good question because it's the first time I've ever been. So the scale of it, the complexity, the vast array of treasures. Let me tell you, I've sort of done a book tour for the last year, intermittently around America. And I've been to various antiques fairs around the country. And what really has surprised me here is that I suppose it's not surprising on balance when you think it's New York City, but the unbelievable quality. Like, actually, it's a bit like walking around a museum, but everything's for sale, which is the dream.
And you can touch it. You can touch things. And you have to ask.
But actually, they didn't really let me touch too much. The other thing which I could definitely say is that all of the wonderful dealers with their treasures can definitely tell whether you're a looker or a buyer. And most of them had absolutely no idea who I was. And so I was definitely in the looker category. And then our revenge as the lookers is to watch the dealers honing in on the genuine buyers. And if you're just a watcher, a speculator, it's really wonderful to watch that amazing sales pitch that starts when they know that they've got somebody who is actually potentially going to buy the $225,000 print, or somebody showed me a beautiful 6th century clasp from a brooch, a cloak brooch from 6th century France. And I was like, wow, how much is it? And he said, it's $55,000. And I was like, wow. And he said, I know, it's so cheap. But anyway, enough from me.
I mean, I would just follow that and say that I'm very much a tourist when it comes to this kind of stuff. and just a bit of an outsider. And I'd say I'd probably look at certain threads and try to connect the dots. I'd say that's for me kind of something interesting for me is to look at, I'm trained as an architect, and I probably gravitate towards architect design furniture. And what's interesting to see all the different threads and different periods of people who had maybe sort of a similar kind of training. And we also tend to make furniture, our studio makes furniture. And I come here and I'm completely humbled at, the craft that is, just part of the fair. So.
That's so great.
Same on all. It's been such a cool show. I'm very, very happy to be here. As a person who both adores art and furniture, but also jewelry, I am stunned that the most affordable things at the show are jewelry. And that's not always the case. So, I could maybe go home with a little something for me. But yeah, the provenance of these pieces and the way that every single dealer is just on it with the details and the story and the where it came from and where it's been and how it got to the show has been so remarkable and impressive. And I'm just a huge nerd, and I love to just be like, I don't know what this is and why is it expensive, and tell me everything. And they're like, we're happy to. It's just the best. It's the most friendly show for things that are so intimidating, to just be sort of astounded by pieces that, there's at Symbolic and Chase, there's like a David brush sort of like arrangement of he just passed away too, so like it's a whole thing, just brooches in a box, and it's presented as art, but you could wear it. And I was like, oh, that's cool, like how much? And they were like, oh, 880,000 for the set, we're not breaking the set up. And I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. How about this Etruscan ring? So yeah, it's been so fun.
I really admired a pair of jar earrings, I will tell you, and I just thought they are so gorgeous, like, how much would you be asking for these? $500,000. But they're worth it, okay? So if you have a feeling for jar, I want to ask you, what is really interesting about the show is the range and the diversity of what you'll find. You'll find contemporary furniture and art, but you'll also find the best of antiquities. So the question for you is, all of you, how do you mix? This is an age-old question, but let's say you've got a client who's got a very modern shell of an architecture, but that client has very eclectic tastes. How do you kind of merge the architecture with the tastes of bringing in a lot of different period things?
I'm trying to think if I've decorated a completely modern shell. I don't think I have. A lot of clients who are very intrigued by things that are old, like everyone in the room. If you look back at collectors, great collectors in the past, they really were assembling their own private museums in a way. And I think that today, the relationship that people have with antique furniture or objects is much less about that, getting the consistent, the best of the best of the best, and building a consistent collection that one day, you might be gifting to a museum or something like that. It's much more about a kind of, no one really wants to feel today as if they're living in a museum. You're living at home, and I think we're all taught, and it's wonderful that we're taught, that your house is really very much needs to be a reflection of your personality. And your personality is drawn out by things that you love. And that can be anything from any era. And the wonderful connections that occur between a piece of mid-century furniture or a piece of 18th century or 16th century furniture or objects or paintings or art is really what kind of draws us. And I'm sure we've all been to beautiful museums, thinking of the Louis Barragan Museum in Mexico City, where there's that wonderful kind of array of objects and things from so many places and so many eras, or Kettle's Yard in Cambridge, which is one of the preeminent collections in Britain. And if you've never heard of Kettle's Yard or visited, it's literally one of my favorite museums. And it was a house, and it's a house museum like the Barragan Museum. This wonderful collector, Jim Eade, and his wife, who built up an astonishing collection of contemporary mid-century art, but combined with old 18th century, 16th century furniture, and then objects that they found and treasured. spirals of stones which they picked up from the beach in graduating sizes and colors. You know, this is what makes us all tick, I think, as humans. The one fundamental thing that you must have in everything you own or enjoy in your homes is that you have to kind of have a connection to it. You have to love it in some way. William Morris said, "Have nothing in your house that you do not believe to be, that you know to be useful and believe to be beautiful." But you just need to love it, and it doesn't matter if it's expensive or you picked it up in a thrift store. That's the single criteria.
That is such the good key. Yeah. Giancarlo, your work is so incredible to me because there's a timelessness, but it's very much of its time. And I think all great design has that capacity where people sort of think, oh, this inspires and delights me, but it also resonates to things of the past. Can you talk about how you approach kind of designing a room and what you'd be looking for at the show to kind of supplement that or add to that?
It's funny because we've been sort of thinking about this over the course of the last 10 years with the studio. And just as we move from, architecture to interiors to decoration, which really feel, for us, there is no silo between those, but it also takes time and you need context. So, how do you create context, architecture, or something that you can kind of react to, and then move that conversation forwards? And I think it's just sort of human nature is we're always looking for an element of surprise, like even in our own work, right? Architecture is it takes time. It's very predictable in some ways. It's, there's a sort of rhythm to it. And then you have the decoration, which to me feels a bit more like jazz, which has a little bit more of that improvised quality. And you have to be a little more free and unfinished about it. So I think that for us is how we balance those two worlds, is to sort of be light with the sort of end and maybe even the middle of a project to allow for things to evolve.
It's like accessorizing fashion, perhaps. Like you have your core pieces and then you can keep adding or changing or embellishing, perhaps.
I echo all of this, right? And the funny thing is I forget this all the time because when you're in the presence of things that are ancient, it's hard to remember that someone who was alive around their peers was making all of this, right? Yeah. At some point, everything at the show was contemporary. And if there was a winter show in 200 AD, then there would be things there, theoretically from, 400 BC. And that's wild. And I think that's so the humanity of it all and the way that every piece has a story that you can connect to or not, and that everything at the show is either for you or it's totally not for you. And this feels like it makes sense for this client or this home and not for this one. That's my favorite thing about it. I love what you said, Giancarlo, about jazz, because it's totally that improvisational, just ready to be inspired by whatever moves you is kind of how I've been moving through the show for the last couple of days. Yeah. And it's so fun because you just sort of see something where you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to bring like green energy in. And then suddenly the booths that are green or emeralds or just sort of objects that feel inspired by botanicals is the thing that I'm noticing and observing. I am in San Francisco where we have a lot of frankly terrible, really, really modern boxy condos, really modern boxy 7,000 square foot monsters that I get to adorn. And that's fine, and a lot of these properties are built by developers. So it's not like there's an architect who really put their heart and soul into these pieces. So I feel very comfortable having a bit of judgment about some of the architecture that I have the glorious opportunity to fill with things and life. And I don't think that it's a matter of just the optics of the mix. I feel very strongly that if it's not for the house or it's not for that client, then you don't need it. I naturally love vintage. I naturally love antiquities. I love bringing that into a client's home because there is a soul. But I do think that, let's say you're in a modern box. One of the ways that you can, bring in pieces that don't otherwise make stylistic sense in the traditional way is color. I do deploy color because color is infinite and it's timeless. And so you can, you can do it that way. Or it's really just, so what if the house is this, who is the client? And if the client has cultural or ancestral connection to an object or a piece, then you can bring that in. And now it's about who lives in that house, because homes, if they are built properly and we're lucky enough, are also the antiques that live way before we ever became occupants, and then will continue to live on into the infinite future. So, yeah.
That's so true. I mean, starting with the client, obviously, is where you all begin, listening to them, seeing what their life is like, their family is like, how they entertain, how they don't entertain. But is there anything where you walk into a house or a room and you go, oh my God, that is such a mistake?
It happens the whole time, doesn't it? And you're like, oh, if only we could have been involved a little bit earlier. And actually, there have been certain moments where we've been asked on the sort of the decoration side of things. I've had to turn the project down because I just couldn't cope. I always have a theory that if it hasn't yet been built, that there's always an opportunity for an intervention. And I was asked to be an interior designer in England on quite a large project that had gained planning consent, and it was a big new country house, and it was nominally quite well designed. You know, the basic composition was good, but as I was looking at the drawings in detail, I was like, and you know how in classical architecture, composition is obviously the first thing, but then there's that whole level of sort of detailed, it's in language, you'd call it syntax or grammar. And if you get those things wrong, it's like kind of like a sentence where the spelling is just, you can't really read it. It lacks meaning. So I quietly said to the project architect the project manager who was trying to get a fee proposal from us, I was like, I'm so sorry. There are just too many things about the outside of this building. Do you think the architect would be offended if I did a little workshop with him to solve some of these issues? And the answer came back a week later and said, he's extremely offended. So it's probably best that we just stay friends. But I think that getting the bones right is, but then the other way of working, decoration is also fantastic. And the old school decorators, particularly in Britain, I mean, one of the things you have to remember about Britain in general, it's true today, it's actually been true for many decades, is that Brits are really poor. And so old school, all of the great English decorators, John Fowler, you will have all heard of, like Colfax and Fowler in the early days, you know, as we all know, they were making curtains out of recycled army blankets left over after World War II.
I did not know that.
Dressed up with a sexy bit of passementerie or whatever, but the fundament, and old school British decorating, you didn't really have the opportunity to kind of like rip stuff to shreds, and you just had to use color, objects, paint, fabric, mirrors, tricks to cover it up. And that's actually quite fun as well. And we get very enveloped in this world where, you know, you come in and before you even start, you know, there's a sort of 4-year reconstruction project. And it's quite fun when you're just decorating. I did the a room in Kips Bay in New York in the summer, and it was great. We had 6 weeks. We couldn't do a thing to the room. We just didn't have the time or the budget or anything. So we just covered it all up with decoration, and it was lovely to do that.
Oh, fun.
It was fun.
Well, Giancarlo, what would really sort of make you uneasy if you went into a house or a room and you thought, uh-oh?
It sometimes starts with a conversation, right? It can be early. I think we shy away from projects that are like tabula rasa, right? Where it's a complete, you know, we like to have that friction. We need, we need the thing to react to.
So is that a client asking for a complete installation, like immediately, we want everything?
It's like you do you.
Right.
We wouldn't do.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel organic, and there's an authenticity there that's lost, I think. So we like the conversations. Jane and I have 2 young kids and live in a very active household. You have to know how that dynamic works, and how you live with things that just are precious or beautiful, but also super functional and comfortable. So I would say if it's like a specific thing, maybe those little children, those little rubber corner things on like a glass table or something. That's a trigger.
That's a trigger. Okay, that's really interesting, because I'm sure a lot of people have those rubber things on their tables here. I want to know, let's say you had the perfect world where you could just dream up a project. Where do you go for inspiration?
So I think on a serious level, actually, kind of one of the things which is a nightmare about the moment that we're all, I mean, there are many nightmares about the moment we're living in. Let's not get into that yet. But one of the issues of the particular moment in culture which we're living in is that we are bombarded by millions of images the whole time. And the other thing about the speed at which images in our world of design, you know, the design is fundamentally an image-based thing, isn't it? But the speed with which the images hurtle around the world, you know, it's just kind of unbelievable. And when we're sort of thinking in our studio, God, we've been quite innovative and clever, having little kind of private chats in the design team, and then 2 seconds later, all you see is like 1930s or 1950s kitchens or retro bathrooms, and you're like, oh my God. So then what my thought is that what you have to do is actually empty yourself of all of that and stop and think hard about, and I almost actually just imagine in my head, what does this room or place, and we design lots of new buildings, and I have a weird side to my studio where we design whole big new towns in the UK, and you're standing in the middle of a kind of muddy field in the middle of nowhere, and you're having to speculate that in this field, in 10 years' time, is going to be a village square or a town centre. And you have to really kind of listen hard to the soil or to the energy of the building, or if you're in a New York apartment building, what is the spirit of this room? And then you're also listening to the owners, obviously, that's an incredibly important part of the dynamic. And actually, you just have to listen to that. And I think, and think about it and sleep on it, and actually try not to look too carefully. The images come later when you're trying to persuade people, because an awful lot of our respective world is like you have an idea quite quickly normally, and then very slowly you have to persuade everyone else that it's the only idea and the best idea. It's not always the case, and the collaboration that emerges when you have a great client who's sparking with you back and forth is actually one of the most exciting moments. And when you have somebody, like you were just saying, who has like, they don't really care, they just want the project, you're like, oh, this is going to be tough because we're having a conversation. But the images come later when you're persuading or trying to explain. But I think to start with, you've actually got to stop looking for inspiration and just start thinking and listening.
So it's a good point. I would just say that our coping mechanism for all the content that we're spoon-fed is to almost take a step back and create our own algorithm. Like, okay, how do you control and actually set limits? You know, I'm trained as an architect, Jane's trained, you know, an editor. And I think that's kind of how we work, is to actually find a type of limit. And I think going to the winter show is like a perfect remedy to the AI slop that you just are fed. Yeah.
I could not agree more though, right? Like that you just need to stop looking at stuff sometimes. One of my favorite things is because I just see images all the time and I'm shopping all the time and I'm looking at things all the time, that you just kind of need to give your brain space. And a lot of times I get my coolest idea. Well, I think they're cool. Maybe everyone thinks they're awful. Just leaving my house and going outside and doing anything else. Just be in the air, literally touch grass if it's not a city lawn or a dog park. And then you kind of let your brain start making neural connections between all of these images. And that's when all of a sudden, like that pattern with this color, with this story, suddenly comes together. But you need like percolating time. I don't think we have enough space in our days these days to sit and wonder or process. And I think we all need, like we're not evolved to do all of this. So we need time to process, right? Like our horsepower in our brain is so much slower than a computer. And also old books. I love old books. Like you just go to used bookstores and anything that was made before digital photography, I snap it up.
There is also a weird thing that if you buy decoration books published from the sort of 1950s or the 1960s or 70s, and particularly when they were publishing things that were quite modish then, but if there's something in those that you find inspirational, it's probably going to stand the test of time a little bit because it's already kind of 50 years old, but still looks completely fresh and amazing. And it is a wonderful thing to do, and they're so cheap. Old decoration, and apart from the really rare ones, but yeah.
Well, I think that the joy of this show, particularly this year, and also thank you all so much for being at this lunch. I think this is one of the most full to capacity lunches I can remember. So thank you all for being here with us. What is so exciting about and challenging about the time we're in, a show like this is just such a sort of panacea for the social media. And especially, I love that you say the dealers are really sussing us out. But they really are. But the great thing also is that they're very happy to share their knowledge and information. And I always get intimidated thinking, I can't ever buy that, but I want to know about it. But the dealers are very, very happy to share their information, and that interchange is so inspiring and so great. So let us open the floor briefly for some questions before you run out and go into the show.
A lot of people here might not know that you and Charlie had fantastic gardens at your own in Dorset. Talk a little bit about your understanding and love of architecture and structure. How do you use that when you think about structuring those gardens?
The relationship between the house and the architecture, or the interior and the garden. I mean, if I'm really honest, and actually this is something so profound in our urban design practice. As architects or interior designers, we're all quite inclined to think that the most important thing in the world is like the color that we're going to pick for someone's living room. Or as the architect, you might be inclined to think that the most important thing you're doing is designing the building. And actually, one of the really wonderful things that we need to remember is that every single building that we build and design is one day going to be a ruin. And I don't know if you know the wonderful 18th century British architect Sir John Soane, who famously used to render most of his presentation drawings to clients. He rendered his buildings as ruins. That was the presentation drawing, because he had this sort of, his famous drawings of the Bank of England, where they're all shown in their demolished state, ironically became all too true when they were knocked down in the 1920s. But it is a really important thing to realize, because the one thing that doesn't change is the land form. It is the most fundamental thing. And when you're starting an urban design project in particular, the shape of the land, topography, which is fundamentally to do with water. Where is water coming and where is it draining? If you get that wrong, it's an expensive disaster. If you get it right, it's deeply permanent. The next thing you're thinking about is movement and how people will be moving. And we all get obsessed these days about electric cars and this and that, and kind of the new obsession is like, will there be flying taxis or whatever? It's like, look, go to somewhere like Damascus. It's 11,000 years old of continuous inhabitation. And the streets are in the same place. And if you get the street network right, it will be there for thousands of years. And the buildings will all come and go. Very few buildings last 1,000 years or 5,000 years or 10,000 years. But the street network, the city of London is the same. They have been there forever. And so there is this very deep connection which we need to relearn to land. Land is also our food. It's animals and it's food. And that early engagement, and actually weirdly these days, sort of gardening for the sake of beautiful pleasure gardening is a little bit like decorating for the sake of ornamental decorating. You can lose sight of those essential qualities. One of the wonderful things about the house we've just moved to, Charlie and I, 18 months ago, in Orkney, which is a very remote group of islands in the kind of northeast of Scotland, off the northeast coast of Scotland, is that we get really insane weather. And so kind of sometimes not much survives. The garden there is fundamentally, like, we've got walls which shelter us, and Charlie's garden is fundamentally about growing food. That's really the thing. And it sort of gets you back to basics, which I think is kind of at the root of your excellent question.
Okay, well then thank you again for being here, and thank you, our panel.